At Hugh.
Oh, okay. Nice. I wasn't sure if it was that there's that design company in Detroit called Tate.
Right.
Like a lot of products. They do that perpetual calendar. I wasn't sure if that was one of theirs, but nice.
No, this one is a Vignelli.
Okay.
So I'm gonna post a little thing. I have all kinds. It's so great today. I have a bunch of like bubble lamps around me.
Nice.
Hi everyone joining. We're going to get started here in a couple minutes. You can, if you're checking us out on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, be sure to comment and ask questions there. I'll be sure they get into the Zoom chat as well. You can also follow us live on Zoom and participate there. If you are joining us from the Zoom, be sure to ask questions in the Q&A and sound off in chat. Love to hear from you.
Thank you, Dylan. And yep, just a big welcome to everybody that's joining us across different platforms who are viewing this 5th week of our Zoom chat series with AIGA Detroit. This is a free weekly live stream that we host. We do about 3 to 4 every week, and we're doing them from now through the end of June. So just feel free to stay tuned every week as we feature a different creative, a different studio, and a different person in our creative industry who talks about not only their own personal journey, but gives a little context to their story. And hopefully it serves as a source of inspiration for all of you. And also the fact that you get to dialogue directly with each of the creatives that we do host through this platform and through this series. And like Dylan mentioned, feel free to ask questions for Christian today. If you do have them, feel free to post them in the comment section, either in Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and also here in chats within the Q&A section. So we'll get started here shortly. And just want to welcome everybody who's tuning in right now. For those of you that are joining us, feel free in the chat section here in Zoom or in the comment thread on whichever platform you're tuning in to. Feel free just to let us know where you're visiting from, maybe what city, state, country you're representing. And I just want to welcome all of you who are tuning in, both here from the Detroit area, also across the country and around the world. So just want to give a big welcome to everyone. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your time zone. Just want to welcome everybody who is tuning in. And today we're really excited to have Christian Unverzagt, who is the founder and principal of M1DTW studio based out of Detroit. It's a design and architecture studio. They do some really beautiful work. I know, Christian, I've been a longtime fan and really respect the work that you've done with a lot of local and international, type of, I don't know, a perspective that you bring as far as your work and your discipline, both to architecture and also to graphic design. So really respect, a lot of the projects that you've done. I know it's Signal Return. I remember I came across your work first at Mills Pharmacy. Really beautiful design approach. So everybody who's tuning in, welcome Christian Unverzagt. And with that being said, feel free to begin your presentation. And again, if you do have questions for Christian, either while he's presenting or at the end of his talk, we will have that dedicated time for Q&A with him, but feel free to utilize the Q&A section here in Zoom and within the comments section. So Christian, welcome.
Thanks, Maria. Thanks, Dylan. Thanks to AIGA Detroit for the invitation. I've been a proud member of the AIGA since 1999 when I was a graduate student in Los Angeles.
Nice.
So we have a couple cats. They're sleeping right now, but they might make an appearance at some point during this presentation. So don't mind them. And so I think what I'm going to talk about a little bit today is I'm going to try and we were going to do the Pachaka Cha kind of special anniversary this month, and we weren't able to do it for obvious reasons. And so this is maybe based a little bit on that idea. We were founded in 2000. 2020 marks the 20th anniversary of the studio. So I'm just going to show one project per year in reverse chronological order. I don't want to bore you from like where we started and where we are now, but maybe you'll see, be able to kind of understand certain threads through the work. Or if you maybe have seen some of the more recent work, maybe you'll make a connection to or understand some of the things we've done in the past. Or for all we know, there's work that you'll see that you didn't know was ours. So this is kind of what went out. It's kind of what's on the website. It's this thing that we always say to try and capture the breadth of what we do. Trained as an architect. We have architects in our studio, but I think we're broadly interested in working on a range of interesting projects and how to make things and tap into the industrial legacy of this part of the country. So we've always characterized it as these four things: the objects, artifacts, identities, and spaces. But I think it's also like, like what exactly is that? So in many ways, it's all of these things. And I think we've relished the opportunity to say yes to clients who've given us the opportunity to work on their projects. Sometimes we'll start with one of these and it'll grow into something else. Sometimes it'll start as kind of spatial work and evolve into other messaging or graphic work. So it's been a lot of fun. So you'll see a lot of books later on, but the most recent book that we're doing that's should be on press any day, we just sort of signed off on the wet proofs, is a project we started in 2013, which is a 350-page book for Rahul Malhotra, who's an architect based in Mumbai and Boston. And so we've done a lot of books for other architects. I think partly, I think as architects, kind of understanding the kind of spatial and material components, and then trying to provide some kind of legible graphic framework for them. 2019, we completed the Oak Ridge Dental Center here in Southeast Michigan, a new build. This is a kind of interior view of the reception area.
Christian, we can't see
yes.
your screen.
You can't see my screen?
No.
Okay. Well, it looks great from here.
As soon as you got into the second section, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. He already started the slides. Okay, there we go.
I've been avoiding Zoom meetings, if you can't tell. Okay, so this is what I was talking about, these four things. But what really is that? It's all these things, right? Buildings and brands and books and slogans and posters and culture and messaging and all kinds of things. So here's the Working in Mumbai book for Rahul, our 2020. Last year, this is the interior view of the reception. It's a kind of new ground up 3,000 square foot building that's punctuated, bringing light in many different ways. It tries to be a calming environment for what's often not a calm experience. I think one of the things you'll see is we try to design places and spaces for people to do their best work. 2018, we did the headquarters for FLOYD Furniture here in Detroit, which was a lot of fun because it was really a way to try and make their office feel like home, because they design products for the home. And I think their kind of mission of designing durable goods is one that aligns with our own. The year before, we did our first ground up building. Took quite a while to get there, for the Water Street coffee joint in Kalamazoo. It's a kind of drive-through, kind of a compact building that we tried to invest with interesting materials and textures. The year before, 2016, we were invited by the platform to do a research study. We was designing and gathering a book documenting everything we could find in their archives and online and elsewhere. So that was quite a joy. I think it's my favorite building in Detroit, as I'm sure many others. And to be able to just intently study it for a while was a pleasure. 2015, we completed the House of Pure Vin, which was a kind of sort of a project about storage and display. Sort of, we thought of it almost like a library. Like, how do you kind of manage inventory, display in a way that maybe could appeal to the kind of a working class sensibility as well, by using common industrial materials. This is in Detroit on Woodward Avenue, which was great to do a project so close to home. This was a project for a photographer who is based in this area, who for many years shot automotive photography for the automotive industry, who would shoot basically product photography for car catalogs. We spent a number of years working with him, developing systems that would allow cars to be sort of automatically photographed. So used cars, particularly if you've ever shopped on Carvana, you've seen the photodome. So we worked with him to kind of refine the kind of manufacturing processes for these domes. It's great to work with highly proficient technical collaborators. We always get to learn something. The year before, our sixth salon opened on Old Woodward. They're a client we've been working with since 2002 and are still working on to this day. In fact, I owe them a phone call, but I was busy preparing this morning. Year before, we did a really calming space, kind of a yoga studio for Detroit Yoga Lab in Midtown. And it's been really great to just watch how people use the spaces we design and kind of take them on as their own. I think we try to create strong spaces that then allow them to kind of have ownership and kind of transform. They really become the backdrop in the end. And then the backdrop to Mills Pharmacy. So we were responsible in this case for the kind of architecture and all the millwork components. We didn't do the branding. We worked with Rita Sayeg on this project, who's a really talented graphic designer in Detroit. And but we were able to kind of refine and help materialize the identity on in this case the rear facade. I actually really like this photo for the patch job in back, kind of like the kind of markings that were existing. So our kind of strong entry, but then the foreground, I think, is my favorite part.
Mm-hmm.
And then Maria, you mentioned signal return. Again, it's like we had a really strong kind of patina in Detroit's Eastern Market. It was kind of really kind of a great worn existing shell. And we kind of upped the identity through the kind of painting of the existing structural system, designed a few key elements, and then handed it off to them to kind of occupy with equipment and prints. And every time I go in, there's even more stuff in there. It's even fuller. It's sort of has come to life. It's a really great dialogue to kind of see that transpire.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do many speculative projects, but 2009, we were approached to take a look at what might be possible for the pedestrian bridge connecting Yamasaki's One Woodward building and the Guardian building in downtown Detroit. Kind of long, interesting story about ownership and who actually owns it and all kinds of things, but it was kind of fun to play with what might be possible. In the end, we really liked the idea of not necessarily the sky bridge itself, but being up between those two landmark buildings. And in fact, the current art installation is like 100 times better than anything we were proposing. So I'm really happy where that's actually wound up. In 2008, right prior to the Great Recession, we transformed kind of decommissioned Kentucky Fried Chicken into an organic eatery. It was short-lived, but I think it was an interesting test in how to kind of transform roadside architecture and maybe kind of like franchise architecture in a way that could mask its original origins. I had this here in 2007. We didn't do all these books this year. I think this was maybe halfway through the series. This was a series of lectures given by architects at the University of Buffalo called the Martell Lectures. So it's always fun to just sort of step into a practice and spend a few months trying to present their ideas and their work, translate them into a material form. And then this is a poster for the fellowships in architecture at Taubman College at the University of Michigan. There was a poster the year before in 2005 that initiated a typographic and image-based kind of sensibility that formed the basis for the identity for the architecture program for a few years, that then morphed into the identity for Taubman College. And that carried through for about 10 to 15 years, 10 years for the college and 15 for the program. So there's been a couple deans changed since that time, and it's recently been redone, but I was really, really proud of this work and what it was able to communicate for that program for as long as it did. And then this was a book series. It was 3 books on a series of debates on urbanism. And we were given the commission after the 3 debates had happened. So we had to find some ways to try and lend some continuity, like what was similar and what was different. And so we were able to track down, this is pre-YouTube, track down the DVDs and do some screen captures. But then the book was formatted in a way that the person on the left was given the left-hand column of a page and the person on the right was given the right. So it kind of had a spatial kind of match. And the nature of the conversation, you could see when someone, not only when someone was speaking, but when someone was quiet. And in this example, it's kind of, the discussion was going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, more like a quick tennis volley. And so in that case, it was kind of a lot of fun to kind of register the tenor of those conversations in typographic form. And the year before that, we did a book that we said was not a book. It was sort of 2 press sheets folded, perforated, and bound with this coil, plastic coil that you could remove to then open the press sheets to their original size. They were completely untrimmed. It was exactly the 2 pieces of paper that were on press. And then you could put it back together, tear it open, and then read it in book form. So we were playing with scale, things that would work at the scale of the press sheet that would then be mixed up the scale of the book, and things at the book that could be read or misread at the scale of the press sheet. This project took 18 months, which at the time was longer than any of our built projects. It was kind of the opposite of what you would expect, but was solely based on an idea that required a lot of direct engagement with printers. And some of our printers told us that we'd worked with in the past, told us it wasn't possible to do what we wanted to do. So we had to find printers that felt it was. And in the end, we were able to accomplish it with them.
And Christian, what printer did you work with on this project?
It was Phoenix out in Troy. And then the tricky part was the bindery. And they contracted the bindery, the kind of folding, perforation, and bindery to Specialties in outside of Toronto.
Nice.
And then in 2003, the first 6 Salon we did opened in Royal Oak. This is a more recent photo. The suspended stations that we designed within the salon, the signage that technically was within the building, so it didn't require a sign permit, so on. And prior to that, we designed a sound studio. We designed a sound studio we called the Sleeper Studio for Transmat Records and Derek May. And it was super compact. It was our first foray into digital CNC cutting and machining, but it provided a place for visiting DJs to sleep, albeit in a sleeping bag up on a loft, and then a place for him to sort of work in his unique style, sort of up down, sitting on the floor, working with his instruments. Year before that, we did a sound studio. It was kind of much more cavernous and removed. So I think Derek's was more kind of just like playing with equipment and recording it, where in this case it had a lot. There was a kind of this was kind of a maybe like a Los Angeles studio quality sound studio here in Ferndale in this case. So this was a lot of fun working with the sound engineer, given some of the material qualities we were working with, to see that they performed properly acoustically. And this maybe is in direct contrast to the project we did for a radio station the year prior, down in on the riverfront in Detroit, where we sort of suspended this really long conference table for 20 people from the hand winch that was in this space, and you can see the skylight. So this is really our first commission. Like, we basically were commissioned to do a table that was a room. Someone saw this project, hired us to do the sound studio. While we were doing the sound studio, we met someone, did a project. They introduced us to our Salon client, who we then continued to do all kinds of work for. So I often, when I talk about these, I often say it's these like small initial projects that start to lead to new opportunities. Someone sees it, and away you go. But I think the thing I want to just point out, this is everyone that's ever worked for us. It's not a lot of people. We're usually like about 4 people. Currently, we're 4 people. Sometimes we'll get up to 6. I think one time we got up to 8. Never less than 2. But 4 is sort of a really good sweet spot, and I think it allows us to get to sort of accomplish a lot, to kind of feed off one another, to be able to work through projects. We're not very hierarchical, where we have different departments where someone does design and then a competition and then production. So we have to lean on each other's strengths and oftentimes learn on the job. But you know, I just want to acknowledge that it's certainly not just me. And while we engage with lots of makers outside to execute our projects, whether those are printers or mill workers or steel fabricators, I've been fortunate to have a really great group of people to work with in the studio in the last 2 decades.
Mm.
So I'm gonna unshare, and maybe you'll see me, and then if there are questions. Hey, Makoto's here. Hey, Makoto. Makoto was came in from LA one summer, was an intern, a paid intern, and spent a year in Detroit living in Hamtramck, and went back to LA, has a great little practice called Scout Regalia that makes some really amazing pieces of furniture and things. They fabricate things in LA. I'd like to think that Detroit kind of gave her the bug, and she took some of that stuff back.
Nice. Well, thank you very much, Christian. Thank you for taking us through in that sequence and really talking through how those projects basically built on one another, and how you worked with different clients through those different connections. So if you guys have questions for Christian, feel free to type those into the Q&A section, or for those of you that are tuning in through Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, feel free to use the comment section there, and that will get communicated here to Zoom. But it looks like Makoto does have a question here. She says, hi, I'm waving at the screen. I have a question. How have things in the design industry changed in the last 20 years, and how have you been able to adjust? That's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say just in terms of communication, you know, thinking back to now, our clients are able to, for better or for worse, continually send us, you know, like photographs. We can kind of interact with them in really direct and visual ways that we couldn't do when we were starting out. I mean, I think back to our, you know, when we had the shop, it was, I think it was, you know, dial-up internet and fax machines. You know, sending fax drawings to, you know, fabricators. So just the kind of level of exchange and control that we're able to have. You know, I think there's a downside of that. You know, things can move quickly. Sometimes it helps you catch something, but also sometimes, you know, if the checks aren't there, I just think about the kind of processes that people have established over so many years of thinking through, like through making, and like when proofs would show up, like the kind of momentous moment of like looking at a set of proofs. Sometimes you don't take it as seriously when a PDF, you know, lands in your inbox.
Mm. And then there's a question here from Doug. Hey, Doug. He says, publication has been changing for some while. How do you see your smart physical work link with media-centric work that has changed publication?
You know, it's interesting. I think, you know, I often think we've designed our last book, and then another one shows up, and you know, the most recent one is the largest one we've done to date.
Mm.
I think there's a lot going on in this question. I think how does the physical work link with media-centric work? I mean, and maybe this gets to some of the kind of disciplinary questions. I think, you know, we've kind of resisted the kind of terminology graphic design or kind of media design. We've often approached our two-dimensional work through its materiality and its publication and its production. So I think we're very interested in the kind of like techniques that are employed to make the two-dimensional work as much as the three-dimensional work. Like going to a press isn't so much different than going to a fabrication shop. I think just thinking about kind of dynamic systems, like sensing systems, I think this is something that's maybe kind of a bit generational. I get super excited to see work that is kind of responsive and kind of dynamic and kind of the kind of inputs are nearly live. So I don't know that that's a really good answer to the question, but it's more kind of I'm anxious to see just how these systems begin to evolve as you know, builders start to employ more sophisticated systems. Everyone begins to catch up and kind of figure out a way to make the best use. I'm wavering, Doug. I might need some help from you later.
Thanks. And then Brooke here has a question as well. She says, hi, Christian. Great to hear about what M1DTW has been up to lately. Really enjoyed visiting the FLOYD showroom when last visiting in Detroit. Any exciting projects on the horizon that you're able to talk about? Yeah,
so Brooke, great to hear from you. I hope things are well in New York, and I'm glad you were able to check out FLOYD. So one project we're working on that's currently under construction, sort of a contemporary of FLOYD, is Bloomscape. So I don't know if anyone knows, Kyle Hoff, one of the co-owners of FLOYD, was a classmate of Justin Mast, who formed a kind of startup plant company called Bloomscape. And they started about back before the Great Recession, and that happened. So it kind of went away, and Justin went to architecture school and started doing things in Detroit, established the practice space, did a bunch of other interesting things, and I think then had the bug to kind of revisit Bloomscape. And so 2 years ago, it was 2 years on the first day of spring. They restarted up, and they've had a lot of really good success. I think it's hard to read a magazine article or a newspaper article without some mention of plants and how they improve our well-being. And they've been working out of co-working spaces. And so we've been working on offices, kind of a office space for them in the core city area. So it's kind of a multi-team collaboration. There's Phil Kafka, who's a part of Prince Concepts, or the developer behind Prince Concepts, has a large building there, and we're just developing it as an office for Bloomscape. It's about 12 or 13,000 square feet. And I think right now, just it's hard to talk about projects like this given everything that's going on. So I think we're trying to make some adjustments to what it means for workspaces. I think a lot of what I talked about is we design these places for people to do great work, and feels like a lot of that's been turned upside down lately. So I think we're all trying to find ways to adapt, but we're hoping that we all come out of this with new perspective and we can adjust accordingly.
Mhm. Thank you, Christian. And then there's a question here from Facebook. It's from Andy Copia. It's from Good Done Daily. Hey, Andy. He wants to know, how does your creative and strategic approach change when working for mission-driven organizations? And then he put in parentheses, small businesses or nonprofits versus larger private clients. Great question.
Hey, Andy. Yeah, so I think, I mean, we tend not to work for too many nonprofits or large private clients or corporate clients. I think you know, maybe in the times we've kind of touched in those areas, it's I might have to think about it a bit more. I think maybe what I would say is that we've been fortunate enough to have kind of smaller kind of entrepreneurs who doubled down in many cases on doing business in Michigan during some very difficult economic times, but using design as a differentiator. Like they've invested in design.
Mm.
And I think you know, I think resources are always scarce. I think, you know, we you know, we have our work photographed, and sometimes I feel like it makes it look too good or too expensive. You know, some relatively inexpensive industrial cardboard tubes built into some wall cabinets, you know, suddenly like start to read a bit differently. So I think we always try to find ways to be resourceful, to do things that are lasting and durable for our clients. And I think when we started out, this was the goal, was to do work that was high quality and that would endure. I think now we have some of the hindsight to see that's played out, that clients who invested in those things are still able to use them. It's allowed them to focus on elevating their own business or focusing on their business. I won't take any credit for a business or a client's business that's been successful, other than to say, I feel like we've given them a platform to reach their goals, or maybe give them the confidence that I suspected that they had. I guess you know, to maybe try and circle back more directly to the question. I think it's just like recognizing like where do we intervene? Like what do we focus on? Maybe, and what are the trade-offs? I think maybe this is the other part of it. Like every project we do something at the expense of something else. Like what is it we gain and what is it we're giving up? Or where do we focus the resources? And you know, maybe there's times those outcomes are more evident, but I think that's maybe the kind of equalizer to all the work that we do.
Okay, thank you, Christian. And then for those of you that are tuning in, feel free to ask Christian questions that you may have during this Q&A portion. I know, Christian, one of my questions that I actually have for you is, where do you draw your inspiration from? Because you have this, what you just mentioned, this key differentiator that really sets your studio apart in the projects that you take on. And where do you draw those sources of inspiration from? Because you're using different materials. There is this sophistication and elevated smart feel to your work. So if you could talk maybe a little bit about where do you draw that source of inspiration from?
Yeah, I mean, it probably has a little bit to do, it's probably like a generational thing a little bit. I mean, I grew up in the 80s, sort of skateboard culture, kind of like do-it-yourself, music. So it's like everyone that I looked up to was had to build their ramp or figure out how to put out their record or assemble their zine. So I think it really came through kind of that era of DIY. Like if you want something to happen, you have to do it. And then along the way, that band figures out they don't actually make press the record. They find the company that can press records, and they tap into them. And so I think it's like we take things as far as we can, and then we learn enough to realize where our limitations are, and then figure out how we can engage someone else who has that skill or that craft. And I think, maybe this is part of, like when I was a teenager, I realized I was designing ramps, building ramps and skateboard ramps, and then trying to promote them. Later on, I realized that was design, like so-called design build and graphic design. If I had to put those into disciplinary silos, like that's where they were, but I was doing them much more directly in a just straightforward, fluid manner. Like we wanted something to do, so we did it. I grew up in Michigan. Michigan's relatively flat. We'd take a shovel and dig a hole and pile the dirt, and now we could jump our bike across that thing. So it was about really being able to construct the world that I was in and interface with that world. I think maybe I later was fortunate to then begin practice in the same part of the world where we had such a strong manufacturing base. And when I say manufacturing base, I don't just mean like car factories. I mean print shops and printers as well. And so, and then just being like asking a stupid question to someone who actually works on the machinery, or a so-called stupid question, like can we punch a hole through a book? Like how many times can we run white ink over itself? Like what are the limits of bending this metal? So yeah.
All right, thank you. And then it looks like there are some more questions here in the Q&A. So Rebecca Mullins, welcome. She wants to know, in what ways has your design style evolved?
Good. I don't know. You tell me. Becky's a good friend. She's does amazing jewelry work out on the west side of the state. How has it evolved? I guess maybe to build on this last comment a little bit, like I think maybe something that I've always tried to do in the built work is build things and be interested in building things in a way that you don't quite understand how they're built, right? I think oftentimes we see like a kind of desire to kind of express how something's put together, and I think I've always been interested in how we can suppress that a little bit. You have to look really hard to figure out how it was done. And I think I think that's still something sort of in the work. Although now I think the thing that's evolved is now we have to find ways to communicate those things to other people. Like we have to, this is really about like the collaborations. And maybe I think one thing that's evolved, maybe it's not style, but it's kind of the working method. Like I'm getting further and further away from the direct means of working on this stuff. Like as I go on in my career, like I was the one in the model, I was the one like snapping the lines, I was the one at the table saw, to the point now, I think, you know, like I'll load a piece of design software and it'll tell me I'm like eight versions out of date. So or I like go to load a font and realize it's corrupt. So I think maybe the thing that's evolved is like how to communicate, and this is something I'm not so good at, and I'm always trying to get better at. But just how to, and this goes back to the team, how to communicate things to the team so they're taking ownership of the work. They're kind of invested in the work. It's not my work that they're doing. It's like our work that we get to work on. So, and I'd say maybe the thing that's evolved is the projects have become bigger and more substantial, and now they're having to maybe there's like more comprehensive systems that are involved. That's just to say, like, designing a building is different than, or a wall section through a building is different than just the piece of furniture that's within it. So, but I think the same desire for kind of like durability, kind of sense of tactility, those are still important.
Okay. And then there's one other question here. It's from Roger Van Tol. Hey, Roger. He wants to know, can you talk a little bit about your ideas on the relationship between brand, space, and graphics?
Yeah. So, hey, Roger. It's good to hear from you. Roger was at M1 for a couple years, maybe around 2015, 2016, I'm thinking. So there are a couple things in there he probably recognized or had a hand in. And so I think one thing I'll say is that in many cases, we've tried to, like in our spatial work, we've tried to find ways, I think recognizing that there can be a spatial brand, or that the kind of any kind of graphic design can be complementary. I'll give you an example, like for well, and maybe that's also to say we'll often try and expand the scope and take on kind of branding or graphic design component in order to keep some of that at bay. I can recall kind of early conversations on various projects where we're doing something spatial, and then a client might say, "Hey, we've got a cousin who's you know, really good at websites. Like, you know, the next thing you know, I get an email with the kind of logo like spinning and on fire or something like that." And so I think we've often tried to be a part of it so that we can kind of focus the role of that work. So I think our branding for Six Salon uses a kind of distinctive typeface and use of color that's not present anywhere as a material within the space. So the logo is red, but we don't paint anything red. There's no like powder coated red metal components. So it's able to sort of kind of complement the materiality, take on a complementary role, rather than being like having to completely mimic it, but in a way that doesn't compete with it. So, and I'd say maybe just like part of what we're doing is to figure out the space in between, right? Like we can do something architecturally, we can do something kind of like graphically, and that you understand when you're in the space that you're somewhere caught between those two, or that the space, you might not see a logo, but you kind of understand that you're affiliated with that brand. And then when you see that brand in print, you might flash back to the space. So but I would say like we generally don't do like hyper branded interiors, for example, like so at least so far.
Okay, sounds good, Christian. And
So
then,
I just have to say I've watched a few of these. The one that completely stressed me out was Aaron Draplin's,
oh yeah.
and I was like, man, I shouldn't be watching this because there's no way I can do anything. There's no one. There's no one like Aaron. So
That's okay, but Christian, don't even worry about that. Like that's the whole point with the series. Everybody has a different point of voice, a different perspective, and a different style and approach. So,
I wore a hat today, maybe to like it's the closest I could get.
well, I'm glad you're representing Detroit. Christian, actually, I have one question for you. And oh, good, there's another question that came in. Oh, Doug said Massimo's calendar in the background. How important are the principles of modernism in your approach to design?
Yeah, it's a good calendar that also doubles as wrapping paper. So it's a kind of durable and sustainable approach there. I would say we kind of recognize that the kind of world's much more complicated and interconnected. I think we try to be a little more open to what that means. I think also maybe this gets a little bit to like when I referred earlier to like we try to create strong spaces. I think spaces that hold together, but that allow for like users to use them in ways we didn't anticipate. That there's kind of a capacity for that to happen, that they don't have to undo what we did to do that necessarily, but that they can somehow there are kind of more possibilities than we could imagine, and that often excites us. Yeah. So, and yeah, Doug, your comment, it's great to see on your website and in your presentation how you credit people you have and are working with. It speaks to a true spirit of collaboration. I mean, part of it, if I don't want to forget people, I don't want to leave people off. I think we put all our specs for our projects. Like we'll list the kind of ink color and the kind of paper spec. It's all there. Like we're not hiding those as trade secrets. Or that this is the shop we use to make this or that. It's there. We want you to use them. It's not that like that's a kind of strategic advantage on our part. So I think it's maybe part of my role also as an educator to just kind of disclose that information. And I would just forget. I find it easier to go to our website and find something than to go digging through our archive sometimes.
Thank you, Christian. And then one other question I was going to ask you is, because your projects, even that one of your first ones that you actually mentioned today with the table design that was kind of semi-suspended, and then there was a support system on the other end. There's this really smart, sleek feel to the work that you create that really pushes the envelope in some respects. How do you get clients to, especially when you were starting out, I guess, because I know people go to you for your specific design, right? They're going to you because you're not doing something that's typical. There's a consideration and a thoughtful approach, and a true design behind what you create. But when you were starting out, how did you get clients to trust you and your vision for specific projects and to do something that was outside of the box?
Well, I think part of our early success had to do with the fact that we were building a lot of that work ourselves, and I think some of the early built projects we weren't hired as the design firm and then contracting the building. We were almost hired as the kind of people that would make it, and then we would design it as a part of it. So I think a couple benefits there. We were able to learn on the job. We were able to understand that idea we had, how difficult it was to realize, or ways to pull it off. But there also wasn't a kind of degradation in the translation that often occurs for young designers trying to execute something, right? Where it's handed to a builder and the builder has an idea of how to do that, or they don't have a grasp on the kind of budgetary implications. So you have an idea, but then the budget can't sustain it. So it's becomes a knockoff of the original design in that way. So we were able to keep the knockoffs at bay through those first few projects as we executed them, learning and then figuring out, okay, to do something like this, here's how we want to approach it. Or by reaching out early on. So the Diller and Scafidio book, for example, we didn't design that thing and then take it to someone and say, how do you print this? We started right off the bat with writing specifications. We didn't even call it a book. We called it 2 posters that were folded and bound. And we started engaging potential collaborators to see like how we would approach it. And you know, and so and then, you know, getting people to, if we're going to make it, this is where we've also had success. We found collaborators that our idea might be a little less than what they typically expect, but it's something that engages them. So they'll wouldn't surprise me that people that will sometimes work on our projects and not make as much money as they might make on another project because they really want to be a part of it, or it kind of like causes them to kind of use their brain in a different way, whether that's a printer or a plasterer or a cabinet maker. So I don't think we're trying to pull a fast one on anyone, but we're trying to figure out where that sweet spot is, and you know, and maybe kind of early on our clients, like we didn't know the full outcome in the way that our clients did it. We had to trust each other and work together to make it a success. And then, you know, now we have that experience in the portfolio to draw upon. And so we just, you know, I don't know, we were just, I think we were just pretty fortunate to, you know, have the kind of time and space to do that work. I mean, the other thing I need to point out is, you know, like we started a lot of this work in a downturn when in Detroit with very cheap shop rent, and you know, the kind of, which gave us the room to just work through our ideas in a way that it's become more challenging more recently, just given costs of construction, you know, costs and availability of workspaces and things like that.
Okay, thank you. And then there's one other question here from Irv Michaels. He says, how does a small firm like M1DTW manage projects that range from book design to building buildings?
Hey, Irv. So Irv's out of Chicago. He's a good friend. We've known him for a couple of years. He does some really great creative consulting. I think this is a bit of a loaded question. He's helped us a lot in the past couple of years, but I'd say I mean, it's a similar approach. I think we try to be disciplined in how we structure our projects, the sort of kind of, I mean, we use some of the tools that I think probably lots of people use to sort of manage and keep track of where they're at, whether it's like communication or tasks or like getting together and meeting. But I think we're also very disciplined just in terms of trying to meet regularly. It's been challenged a little bit. I think we all miss like being together in the same studio. To have our kind of regular rhythms, but also our kind of informal interactions. I think the one thing I would say we've normally when we're in the studio, we take it very seriously, and we all show up in the morning and we work very hard, and we go home, and then we do other things. We go home to our families, and we spend time doing other things that interest us, and then we come back the next day. So I haven't talked about this, but we're not kind of a grind 'em firm. We're not, we don't engage in kind of unpaid internships or unpaid labor. I think that constraint, I think, allows people to continually have a kind of fresh perspective and to kind of like pursue the work and not get burnt out. I mean, I think like right now, I think I've been there 20 years, and I think we basically have maybe 2, 3, and 5 years. So we're not like a 6 month and out, or people constantly passing through the door. We really rely on everyone on the team to do their part and to push things forward. And so it's hard. I mean, only having 4 of us to manage things that are unpredictable and have their own schedules, but we try.
All right, thank you, Christian. And we're at time right now, so I just want to thank you very much for spending this lunch hour with everybody who's tuned in, both here in Zoom, on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and all of our streaming platforms. Christian, it's always great to hear from you. It's always great to learn a little bit more about the backstory and just hearing about projects in general, and especially with firms that are doing such great design like M1DTW. Again, really respect the work your studio puts out. And I really respect you and what you're doing also for the city, because you're definitely leaving an imprint all over, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. I admire it, I respect it, and I want to thank you for your time, and for all those who have tuned in, who have asked questions, who have been dialoguing here. Please know that these are, again, free weekly chats, so we feature a different creative every week. We wrap up tomorrow on Friday. We're going to be speaking with a UX designer. His name is John Yablonsky, so feel free to tune in tomorrow. But thank you again for all of you who have tuned in today. And Christian, thank you very much for spending the last hour with us.
Right on the nose. We did a great job. I enjoyed it.
All right, thank you.
Everyone, be safe.
All right, take care. Have a good rest of your week and weekends. Bye-bye.
Bye.